Didn't Catherine do a phenomenal job with that scripture reading? It's great to be with all of you this morning. My name is Charlie Dunn, and I hope that you had a very happy Thanksgiving. And as you can tell from the Christmas decorations and Christmas Day marks the beginning of the season known as Advent, leading up to Christmas. And this year, for our Advent teaching series, what we're doing is we're going to be looking at the 4 traditional Advent themes, each of which is symbolized by one of the candles on the Advent wreath. And so the Jacob family, they lit the first of those candles, the candle that symbolizes Advent hope. And as I've thought about it this week, I don't think that hope is exactly the right word. It's not the word that I would have chosen. And I know it's the first week of the series, and I'm already changing up the words, and maybe that seems like a hopeless start to the series, but it should be. It's hopeless because we don't need the word hope, so to speak. For me, at least, when I hear the word hope, I think more of what we celebrate at Easter. This sense of really joyful and confident anticipation of the fact that the God who triumphed over sin and death in Jesus is going to return to resurrect the whole of the world. There's this joyful confidence in our Easter hope. But I think the hope of Advent is more like the hope of longing. Maybe the better word for us would be longing. It's this longing to see some form of light break into the darkness. It's a longing to see healing or restoration in places that are broken. The hope of Advent is more this feeling of longing. I think about the story that for some of you maybe is familiar, the Chronicles of Narnia, the story, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you're familiar with that story, then you know the longing experienced by the creatures and the people in Narnia. They live in a world where it is always winter, but it's never Christmas. They live under the curse of an evil white witch. And yet, in the midst of these circumstances, in spite of the fact that there's really nothing to suggest that their situation would ever change, they long for Christmas to come. They long for the curse to be broken. They long for the snow to melt, for the ground to thaw, for new life to spring forth again. They are a people who are marked by longing. And I think in many ways, whether you're a Christian or not, this is a season, this is a time of year, the Christmas season, that very much can be one where we are familiar with the feeling of longing. Certainly you think about little kids who long to wake up on Christmas morning to open presents underneath the tree. Think about the longing of students who long for their finals to be completed, exams to be over, to be able to be out on Christmas break. Some of you long to be gathered with family, to see family that maybe you only get to be with at the holidays, and it's not long before you're longing for them to return home, to go back to wherever it is that they live. And I think for some of us, maybe there's a bit of a longing for Christmases gone by. You look back to past memories of great Christmases, and yet maybe some of the people who made those holidays so special, maybe they're no longer here with you. And so for you, maybe some of that longing is a longing of loss. It's a longing marked by some sadness. I think for others of us, maybe you look at other people around you in this season, You feel like their lives or their families are full of love and joy and fullness. And maybe there's a sense where you feel like you are missing out. Maybe you long for a family, for a larger family. Maybe you long for children, or you long for a spouse. And there's some sense of brokenness, and you're longing for that emptiness to be filled. In many ways, this is a season of longing, I think, especially if you're a Christian. If you would call yourself a follower of Jesus, I find this to be true in my own life. Whenever this Christmas season comes, I want to listen to as much Christmas music as possible. Like as soon as Thanksgiving passes, I immediately want to start listening to Christmas music. But why is that? I think there's some longing in my heart. Maybe this is true in yours, where we say, maybe this is a year. Maybe in this season of time, maybe there's something about kind of the magic of the season as you listen to Christmas music, as you hear Advent sermons, as you go through an Advent devotional, this longing that the miracle, the mystery of God becoming human in this baby, Jesus Christ, it would connect with you in a fresh way. That you would encounter Jesus, that this would be real and fresh and meaningful in your heart. You long for more of Jesus, or you long for his healing, his restoring work to come home, to change you in some profound way, or you long to see his restoring work in a world that sometimes can seem broken and dark. In many ways, Advent is a season of longing. Yet it's a season that was actually birthed out of an even longer season of longing. You reach back into the Old Testament, the history of the people of God, and what you find is that for centuries, even thousands of years, the people of God, they were longing for this mysterious figure to come called the Messiah, the Christ, the one who would save God's people from their sins. And you see, it's this longing for the Messiah that the prophet Isaiah is speaking to here in Isaiah chapter 40, the passage that Catherine read for us so well. This longing for God to show up in a way that would meet some of the deepest longings of our hearts. I think Isaiah tells us that there's this hope that God would come to meet two longings in particular. First, our longing for a better world. And then secondly, our longing for a comfort that would console the deepest hurts of our hearts. We long for a better world, and we long for a deep comfort. Look with me at this in Isaiah 40, beginning in Verse 3, look what Isaiah says, a voice of one calling. In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain. Now, what is Isaiah talking about here? He's talking about preparing for the coming, the arrival of a king. That's all of this language about making routes and paths and highways. You know, in Isaiah's day, the roads were pretty much just wherever people walked. The pathways that had been tread as animals or people had regularly walked along a certain way. But when a king was going to make a journey, when a king was going to visit a distant part of his kingdom, or he was going to go to a part of his kingdom where the king had never been before, what they would have to do is they would have to make roads. Sometimes they would have to build entirely new highways, sometimes paved roads for the king to be able to make his journey. Because you can guarantee if the king is going to come to that place, not only does he need a smooth path because of how important he is, but the king isn't coming alone. Right? The king doesn't travel alone. He has a whole entourage of people with him, and so that there would be enough room for that entourage to pass, there would have to be roads, and often they would send an entourage ahead of the king, kind of like an advance team that would work on building these highways. It's not so different from today. You think about celebrities, you think about politicians, dignitaries. If they're going to go somewhere, there's an advance team. There's a group that goes before them to prepare the way. They set up the event venue, they get all of the hotel rooms ready, they get the security set up, they do the publicity. There's an advance team that prepares for the coming of this significant, important person. In fact, I remember reading a few years ago, I was struck by this. In the People's Republic of China, when Mao was the chairman in China, apparently they built all of these kind of luxury retreats in various parts of the country, and they would pay to constantly staff and to heat these houses so that they would be ready. In the event that Chairman Mao should choose on a whim to travel to that part of China, and some of these houses, he never went to them. He never visited them, and yet they always had to be prepared. They always had to be ready for his arrival. Well, in some way, that's the kind of preparation that Isaiah is speaking to here. He's talking about people preparing for the arrival of a king, making highways, making paths to get ready for this king to come. But if you pay attention to the way that Isaiah describes this preparation, to the way he describes this transformation, you begin to quickly think to yourself, wait a minute, this cannot be any ordinary king. This cannot be any human sort of king. Because look at the extent of the transformation that Isaiah actually describes. Typically if a human king was going to make this journey and they came to a big valley, what might you do? Well, maybe you build a bridge so that the king can travel over the valley. But look what Isaiah says. He says that instead, every valley shall be raised up. Like the whole valley just vanishes. The valley is gone when this king comes. Or a mountain pass. If you had a human king who was coming through a mountain pass, what might you do? You might go and explore, figure out, is there a safe way to pass through the mountains where people can travel? But Isaiah says here, he says that every mountain and hill will be made low. Whole mountain ranges are brought down for the arrival of this king. The extent of the transformation leads you to recognize this is not any ordinary king whose coming Isaiah is describing. He's talking about the coming of no less than the king of creation. No less than a cosmic king. No other kind of king could transform the world in such a dramatic way. And in describing the coming of this king of creation, I think what Isaiah is doing is he's speaking to one of the deepest longings of the human heart. And what longing is that? It's a longing for a better world. It's a longing for a world that would be transformed, for a world that would be made right in the places where it is wrong, a world that would be restored in the places where it is broken. I think if we were to look back on this past year, even though it's quick to move on with every new news cycle, we recognize that many people's lives in our own country were devastated by hurricanes. They're still recovering, still repairing from those storms. We know that war continues in places like the Ukraine or in the Middle East. We know that many of the world's people are enslaved or live in significant poverty or hunger. The statistics of sadness that are tracked by sociologists, even in the wealthier countries of the world, they're recording levels of anxiety and depression and loneliness and suicidal thoughts and addiction at higher levels than ever recorded in history before. I think that all of us in this room have had some experience with pain, with loss, conflict in relationships, deep heartache, certainly the realities of health issues and disease and death itself. And the strange thing is that even though we would all say, look, that's the only kind of world we've ever really known. there's still this restlessness. There's still this longing, the sense that somehow we're alien to this world. We long for a better world. We look at the world and we say, that's not the way it is supposed to be. And when the prophet Isaiah tells us here, is he says that the king who is coming is going to do something about that. That he's going to restore what is broken in this world. Look at verse 5. It says that the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all mankind will see it together. That is the salvation that Isaiah says is coming, is a salvation that is, it's not just for the people of Israel. He says all mankind will see it. This is a salvation that will be made available to all of the people of the world. Isaiah says this work of God is going to happen. God is going to do this work of incredible transformation. And yet, did you notice, it's strange, isn't it? That at one level, Isaiah is saying, look, this is the kind of transformation that only the king of creation can do. This is the kind of restoration that only a cosmic king can do. Every mountain brought down, every valley raised up. And yet at the same time, he gives a command. And we're given a command. What is that command? We're told that we are to prepare the way of the Lord, to make straight a highway for our God. And if those words sounded familiar to you, it might be because later in the New Testament, those words are repeated by a guy named John the Baptist, the forerunner, the one who's preparing the way for Jesus, says, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight a highway for our God. So I think that the question for us is even as we are people who we long for the work of restoration that only God can do and only Jesus will do when he comes back a second time to renew the world, at the same time, how do we right now prepare the way for the Lord? How do we right now make straight a highway for our God? How do we do the work of seeking to align our hearts and our lives with the restoring rule of King Jesus? And toward that end, I think maybe this metaphor of road construction is kind of helpful. If any of you drove on I-35 to visit family over Thanksgiving, you know that it's like in a state of perpetual construction. It's always being worked on. 635 east of here in Lake Highlands, you're like, when will that construction ever be done? But if you look at the road construction in your life, it's ongoing. It's meant to be ongoing. And if we were to work from that metaphor, maybe we would ask ourselves questions like these. In this Advent season, do you think, are there any paths in your life that need to be changed? Are there any paths in your life, any roads in your life that you feel need to be redirected? Maybe you look back on this past year and you had some hopes, you had some plans, you had some expectations for how your life was going to go, how things were going to play out. Maybe you're looking ahead to next year, to several years in the future, and you've got very specific plans for how your life is going to play out. But listen, friends, if Jesus really is the king of creation, and if he's going to be the king in your life, then maybe you need to ask, are there plans, are there paths that I need to allow him to redirect? Where I can loosen my grip on some of those plans to be able to say, you know what, Jesus, you're in charge, not me. If you're the king of creation, can I entrust this to you? Can I believe that your paths maybe are better for my life than what I would choose for myself? Even if I wouldn't initially choose those paths, are you able to say, Jesus, you are the one who leads me in paths of righteousness for your name's sake? And so whatever those plans for life, whatever those paths for life might be, I'm willing to surrender those to you. Or maybe it's crooked places, crooked paths that need to be straightened out. Are there any crooked desires in your heart right now? where you would look at your heart and you'd say, you know what, honestly, right now, Jesus, I am finding more value and worth in what other people think of me, or maybe in how much money I make or have, or in the way that I look, or where I live, or in career accomplishments. I'm finding more of my value and worth in those things than I am in you. Are there crooked turns that need to be straightened out? Are there potholes that need to be filled in? Maybe those are besetting sins in your life, things that you feel like you keep tripping over, you keep stumbling over again and again and again. And maybe you're tempted to grow cynical, to start to think, you know what, that's just the way that I am. These things about me will never change. Yes, I have an anger problem, or yes, I have a lust problem, or a gossip problem, or I know that I can be inflexible and demanding, or I know that I can be so independent that I won't ask for help, and I certainly won't give help to others and tend to feel like they need to take care of themselves. I know that these are problems in my life, but this is just who I am. Or do you believe that Jesus is able to fill in those potholes? That he's able to fix those rough places, to smooth them out? Or maybe you would ask, are there any narrow places in your life that need to be broadened? Where you say, I've got specific perspectives and prejudices and preferences and politics, and maybe none of those have really anything directly to do with what God reveals in his word clearly to us. But you say, those are my prejudices, my preferences, and they tend to lead you to be critical and judgmental towards other people. And you'd say, okay, that's a narrow place in my life that I need broadened more by Jesus's love. I think all of us, we long for Jesus to come again to restore what is broken in this world. But I think part of our response is to say, Jesus, what is broken in me that needs to be healed, that needs to be restored? Isaiah calls us to long for the King to come and restore what is broken, to make this world better, even as he also invites us to long for a deep comfort. That's the second longing that we see met in Isaiah's prophecy, this longing for comfort. I have two sons, and my younger son just turned 1. His name's Hayden, and Hayden is learning to walk, or he's learning to stand up at least, to kind of pull himself up. And as a result, he's constantly falling and hitting his head on things, and he starts to cry. And in those moments, what does he want? He longs to be comforted in his pain. I have an older son who's almost 4. His name's Patton, and Patton is a wonderful, wonderful little boy, but sometimes he does things that he's not supposed to do, and as a result, sometimes he's sent to his room for a brief timeout. And even in those moments, what does he want? He longs that we would still come to him and comfort him, even when he's messed up, even when he knows he hasn't behaved well. I think all of us, we long for that kind of comfort, don't we? We long to be comforted in our pain. We long to be comforted even where we know we've messed up and we've failed. And Isaiah speaks to this longing for comfort in a way that actually is really surprising. I don't know if any of you have ever tried reading through the whole book of Isaiah before, but if you have, what you will find, we've read Isaiah 40, but Isaiah 1 through 39 is pretty much all judgment. It's all warning. There's not a lot of comfort in Isaiah 1 through 39. And the reason for that is because Isaiah is a prophet of the living God, God who is the King of creation. And so it is Isaiah's job to proclaim these are God's standards. This is what he expects in terms of how we would treat God and treat other people. And the people of Israel have fallen woefully short of those standards. And so as a result, right before Isaiah 40 and Isaiah 39, they are warned, the people of God are told, you're going to be carried off into captivity. You're going to be taken into exile in the land of Babylon. They are given this great warning of terrifying judgment. And it's on the heels of this warning that suddenly Suddenly, God says, Isaiah, speak these words, comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. And you notice that word comfort, it's repeated, which in the Hebrew language, that doubling, it's meant to convey intensity, like a deep comfort that God wants to give. And notice, even as he's sending them out into exile, he still calls them my people. He says, they're still my people. And he says, speak tenderly to them. Speak with tenderness and compassion and care. That is, these are words that are meant to convey deep comfort to God's people. I mentioned the Chronicles of Narnia before, and I think about these books in the Christmas season, because it's always winter and yet never Christmas. But my favorite story in the Chronicles of Narnia series is the book that really doesn't contribute to the rest of the plot line. It's a book called A Horse and His Boy. And it's about this boy. His name is Shasta. And he grows up in the care of this very cruel man who is not really his father, but who claims to be his father. But he's figured out he's probably not really his dad. And Shasta dreams of escaping. He dreams of running away from this home. And he meets a talking horse named Bree, and together they plot their escape, and they make their escape to the north. And along their way, they meet some new traveling companions. They become friends with them, and on their journey, they go through this really large city called Calormen. And in this large city, they get separated. And so Shasta hopes to be reunited with his companions, and as he waits for them, he actually has to spend the night alone in a graveyard, which I think would be pretty frightening for any person to do. And there in the graveyard, he is feeling alone. He's feeling discouraged. He's frightened. He's sad. And there suddenly is a cat. And this cat comes and curls up alongside of him. And in the presence of this cat, he feels that his fears are suddenly calmed. He feels a sense of peace. He feels okay, and he falls into a deep sleep. Well, later on in the story, he's reunited with his companions, and yet once again, he gets lost. They get separated. This time he's in a thick mountain fog, and as he is separated, he begins to feel really discouraged. He begins to feel really sorry for himself. He begins to think that life has treated him very unfairly, that life has gone better for everybody except for him. And it's in this moment of self-pity and sadness that again he senses this presence alongside of him. And this presence speaks to him these words. The presence says, "Tell me your sorrows." And I wonder, friends, could you imagine Jesus even speaking those words to you today? Saying to you, "Tell me your sorrows." And he answers, and he begins to share his sorrows. He begins to share about all of his hurts and his struggles and confusion, even the places of his own failure. And as he is unburdening his heart to this presence with him, he begins to see this recurring theme of cats throughout the course of his life. These cats, these lions that have shown up at his life, these cats, at significant moments in his story. And he begins to realize that actually maybe this cat is one. And then the presence with him speaks, and it's also a cat. It's this lion called Aslan, who's a Christ-like figure in the story. And Aslan says, "I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear for the last mile so that you could reach the king in time. And I was the lion you do not remember who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man sat wakeful at midnight to receive you." I remember once talking to a lady I know who said that she read this story to her son when he was a boy. And up until this point in the story, her reading voice had been rich and full. And then her voice started to break. And he looked up at his mom and he said, "Mom, why are you crying?" And I think the reason she was crying is because when you go through life knowing this God who has come to us in Jesus, even as you look back and you see places of deep failure, or you see places of great loss and sadness, places of hurt, places of confusion, you begin to recognize that this God, this Jesus, was with you in those moments, coming alongside you. That he was there to lead you into places of greater hope and healing, to fill your heart with a deep comfort and peace. I was talking to one family in our church recently who said that they'd gone through this really harrowing experience of childbirth. It was really scary, really life-threatening, and they said it was so surprising, though, because they said even in the hospital, they had this profound sense of peace, this profound sense that God was near them and with them, even in those moments of fear. And I think that's true for those of us who are walking with Jesus, that we find that he is a God who longs to comfort us. That, yeah, he's the king. Jesus is the king who one day is going to come and he's going to fix everything broken in the world. He's going to restore all sources of injustice. He's the one who's going to right every single wrong. But listen, friends, Jesus is not the kind of king who says, "Get it together or get out of my way." Jesus is not the kind of king who beats us over the head with truth or who will shame us in our shortcomings. Even in his restoring, transformative work in our lives, he does this with great tenderness, great compassion, great care. Isaiah, he speaks these words that are meant to tap into our longing for restoration, but also our longing for comfort. But I'll tell you, and I'll end with this, I think that Isaiah's original readers, when they heard these words, they might have heard the words of hope for a better world. They might have heard the words of hope for great comfort, but I think they would have been very confused. I think they would have been very troubled by these words. They would have found this very mysterious because they would have thought to themselves, wait a minute, how is it possible that this God who is going to renew and restore everything broken in the world, this God of justice, is at the same time a God of great care and tenderness and compassion? How is it the God who is warning us that we're going to go off into exile and captivity because of our sin is at the same time this God who speaks, "Comfort, comfort, oh my people"? How is it that both of those could be true at the same time together? And I think we see a hint, only a hint of the answer here in Isaiah's words. Look with me at verse 2. God says to Isaiah, "Proclaim that her hard service has been completed." Her hard service, that word hard service, it means in the Hebrew a struggle, a period of duress. And that's what Israel's about to enter into in their captivity. But here, God, speaking to the prophet, calls him to look forward to the future as if that hard struggle has already been completed. Proclaim that the period of hard service is completed. It's not going to last forever. It's going to come to an end. Why? Here's how he continues. He says, "Proclaim that her hard service has been completed. Her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." And what does he mean, double for all her sins? When I first read that, I don't know about you, but it seems to me almost as if they're getting double punishment. They're getting punished twice, or they're getting double the punishment that their sin deserves. And I hear that and I think that doesn't sound very fair. And I think God would agree. You read through the Bible, does that sound like something that God would do, that he would give somebody twice the punishment that their sin deserves? No, God is just, but God is also incredibly gracious. He treats us so much better than we deserve. And you see, what God is saying here and what Isaiah is saying here is not that the people are going to receive twice the punishment that they deserve. Now, what he actually says is he says, from the Lord's hand, there will be a double payment for their sin. A double payment for our sin. What is he talking about? What does he mean, a double payment, a payment for sin that is so great, that is twice what is needed, that is over the top, that is extravagant, an extravagant payment for sin? Friends, that's what we celebrate every week together at the Lord's table. That's what God has done for us now in Jesus Christ. He's made a double payment for our sin. Think about it. God hasn't just pardoned our sin. He hasn't just done enough so that our sin can be forgiven. More than that, we are given the righteousness of Jesus. Jesus' perfect life is now credited to us. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says that he who knew no sin became sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. It's the great exchange. It's a double payment for sin. It's not just that our sin gets pardoned so that we can have a clean slate to try harder the next time. No, instead, we're actually credited with the righteousness of Jesus. We are adopted as beloved children into the family of God. And you see, it's the gospel then of this double payment for sin that brings these two longings together. That reconciles these two longings, a longing both for a better world as well as a longing for comfort. Why? Because look, if you know the comfort that your sin has been paid for, your sin has been completely removed from you, that now you are perfect and spotless in God's sight in Jesus, you can have the courage to maybe face and to own some of those potholes that need to be filled in, some of those crooked desires that need to be straightened. You can own the places of restoration that are needed in your own life if you have that deep comfort that your sin has been paid for. And yet at the same time, you can know that not only does God love you as you are, but he loves you enough not to leave you as you are. That longing for real change, that longing for real transformation in our lives, both of these longings, the longing for a better world and the longing for comfort, they are met together in the cross of Jesus. And that's what we celebrate when we come to the Lord's table together. So would you join me now as we pray? God, if we're honest with you, we know that there are a lot of parts and places of our hearts that need to be repaired, that what is broken in this world is not just outside of us, but it is certainly within us. And yet we thank you for the comfort of this table. We thank you for the comfort of knowing, Jesus, that you gave your body for us, that you shed your blood for us, that you made not just a payment for our sin, that you made an extravagant payment of your perfect life and your perfect death, so that we could know not only is our sin removed from us, but that we are now covered in your perfect righteousness. We pray, God, that would be a deep comfort to us today in those places of hurt and pain and failure in our lives. But we also pray that, Lord, that it would allow us to be willing to look at those places where we also long for change and where we need to change. Would this be an Advent season where we would prepare our hearts for more of that restoring rule of Jesus within us, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Friends, on the night that